August 3rd, 1963. 11:47 p.m. Tony "Deadeye" Romano fired 7 shots at Bumpy Johnson from 20 feet away. 7 shots from the best professional killer the Genovese family had ever employed. 7 shots that should have ended the life of the most powerful man in Harlem. All 7 missed. Not close. Misses. Complete misses. Bullets hitting walls, windows, parked cars. Everything except Bumpy Johnson. And instead of running or shooting back, Bumpy Johnson did something that shocked everyone on that street corner. He walked over to Tony Romano, looked him straight in the eye, and said 6 words that would change both their lives forever. "Son, you need better training." This is the story of how the deadliest hitman in New York became Bumpy Johnson's student, and why sometimes the best way to handle a killer is to teach him how to kill properly. To understand what happened that night outside Small's Paradise on 35th Street, you need to understand who Tony Romano was in August 9. 28 years old, Italian-American from the Bronx, and the most feared assassin in the Genovese crime family. Tony had been killing people professionally for 8 years, ever since he got out of the Marines in 23 confirmed kills, never missed a target, never left a witness, never failed to complete a contract. Tony earned his nickname Deadeye because he could put a bullet through a silver dollar at 100 yards. Military training, natural talent, and 8 years of practice had made him the most reliable killer in organized crime. When the Genovese family needed someone eliminated, they called Tony Romano. When rival families wanted to send a message, they hired Tony Romano. But August 3rd, 1963 wasn't going to be just another contract. This was going to be the job that made his reputation legendary. The Genovese family had offered him $25,000 to kill Bumpy Johnson. More money than Tony had ever been paid for a single hit. The contract came directly from Anthony "Fat Tony" Salerno, underboss of the Genovese family. Tony, Fat Tony, had said, "We've tried everything with Bumpy Johnson. Bombs, ambushes, poison, insider betrayals. Nothing works. The man is like a ghost. But you're different. You're the best shooter we've ever had. If anyone can kill Bumpy Johnson, it's you." Tony had studied Bumpy's routine for 2 weeks. Every Tuesday and Friday night, Bumpy ate dinner at Small's Paradise. Same table, same time, same routine. He would arrive at 10:30 p.m., eat for exactly 1 hour, then walk outside to his car parked directly across the street, 20 feet from the restaurant door to the car. Perfect kill zone for a professional marksman. August 3rd, night, 10:15 p.m. Tony positioned himself in an alley across from Small's Paradise with a clear view of Bumpy's car. He was carrying his favorite weapon, a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum, with a 6-inch barrel, the same gun he'd used for his last 15 kills. Accurate, reliable, deadly. Tony had test-fired it that afternoon at a shooting range in Queens. 6 shots, 6 perfect bullseyes. The weapon was functioning perfectly. 11:30 p.m., Bumpy Johnson walked out of Small's Paradise, just like he had every Tuesday and Friday for the past 3 years. He was wearing his usual charcoal gray suit, black fedora, moving with the careful, measured pace of a man who knew that staying alive meant never rushing, never being careless, always staying aware of his surroundings. Tony raised his gun, sighted down the barrel, centered the crosshairs on Bumpy's chest, 20 feet away. Impossible to miss. Tony had made harder shots in total darkness, with inferior weapons. This was going to be the easiest $25,000 he'd ever earned. Tony pulled the trigger. The bullet went wide left, hitting a street lamp 15 feet from Bumpy. Tony was confused but not concerned. Sometimes the first shot was off. Adrenaline, excitement, overconfidence. Tony adjusted his aim, breathed steady, fired again, wide right. The bullet shattered the window of a parked Chevrolet. Tony stared at his gun, checked the sights, wiped sweat from his eyes. This wasn't possible. He was Tony "Deadeye" Romano. He didn't miss. Not at 20 feet. Not with a .357 Magnum. Not when he'd been preparing for 2 weeks. Third shot. High. The bullet hit the brick wall above Bumpy's head. Fourth shot. Low. The bullet sparked off the sidewalk at Bumpy's feet. Fifth shot. Another wide left. Sixth shot. Wide right again. Tony was down to his last bullet. 6 shots fired. 0 hits. The most accurate shooter in organized crime, completely missing a stationary target at 20 feet. Tony was starting to panic. This wasn't just embarrassing. This was impossible. That's when Tony noticed something that made his blood run cold. Bumpy Johnson wasn't running, wasn't taking cover, wasn't even looking concerned. He was just standing there, calm as could be, watching Tony fire shot after shot and miss by feet, not inches. 7th shot. Tony aimed carefully, held his breath, squeezed the trigger slowly. The bullet went wide left again, hitting the same street lamp from the first shot. Tony's gun was empty. 7 shots, 7 misses. The most feared hitman in New York had just experienced the most humiliating failure of his career. And Bumpy Johnson was walking toward him, not running away from the shooter, not calling for help, not drawing his own weapon, just walking calmly across the street toward the alley, where Tony was hidden, like a man taking an evening stroll. Tony dropped his empty gun, reached for his backup weapon, a snub-nosed Beat 38. But before he could draw it, Bumpy Johnson was standing right in front of him, close enough to touch, close enough to kill with bare hands. "Son," Bumpy said quietly, "you need better training." Tony stared at Bumpy, confused, terrified, and completely bewildered. "I don't understand. I never miss. 23 kills, never missed once. That gun is perfect. I test-fired it this afternoon." Bumpy smiled. Not a mean smile. Not a threatening smile. Almost a fatherly smile.
Tony Romano.
Dead-eye. Best shooter the Genovese family ever had. 23 confirmed kills. Marine Corps marksman. Honorable discharge. Lives on Arthur Avenue. Apartment. Mother's name is Maria. Makes the best meatballs in the Bronx. Tony's eyes went wide. "How do you know everything about you?" "Because I've been expecting you for 2 weeks. Ever since Fat Tony put the contract out." Bumpy reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made Tony's heart stop. 6 bullets. The bullets from Tony's gun. "These came from your Buy 357, Tony. All 6 of them. I had someone collect them after you fired." Tony looked down at his gun on the ground, then back at the bullets in Bumpy's hand. "That's impossible. I fired 7 shots. "You fired 7 shots, Bumpy agreed. "But only 6 bullets came out of your gun. The 7th was a blank." That's when Tony understood. His gun had been tampered with. 6 real bullets deliberately loaded loose, so they would fly wildly off target. 1 blank cartridge for the final shot. Someone had sabotaged his weapon, but I tested it this afternoon. Perfect accuracy. "You tested it with the ammunition I provided," Bumpy said calmly. "My people switched your bullets while you were having lunch. You spent 2 hours at Rao's restaurant today, eating chicken parmesan. More than enough time to doctor your ammunition." Tony sank against the alley wall. Everything made sense now. The wild misses, the impossible inaccuracy, the complete failure of his most reliable weapon. Bumpy Johnson had known about the assassination attempt from the beginning, and had turned it into an elaborate demonstration. "Why?" Tony asked. "Why didn't you just kill me? Why the games?" "Because killing you would be wasteful," Bumpy replied. "You're the best shooter in New York. 23 kills, no mistakes. Perfect record. That's valuable. The question is, are you working for the right people?" Bumpy sat down on a trash can next to Tony, like 2 friends having a conversation. "Let me ask you something, Tony. How much is Fat Tony paying you for this job?" $25,000. $25,000 to kill the most protected man in Harlem. Not bad. But let me make you a different offer. $50,000 to work for me instead. Tony looked up, confused. "Work for you? But I just tried to kill you, and you failed spectacularly. But that wasn't your fault. That was sabotage. With proper ammunition and a clean weapon, you probably would have killed me on the first shot. That's exactly the kind of skill I need. Bumpy stood up, extended his hand to help Tony to his feet. Here's my offer, Tony. You come work for me. I pay you double what the Genovese family pays. I give you better targets, cleaner jobs, more security, and most importantly, I teach you things about shooting that the Marines never taught you. What kind of things? Things like how to recognize sabotaged ammunition, how to test your weapon properly before a job, how to read the wind, the light, the angles, how to make impossible shots in impossible situations. I may not be a professional killer, Tony, but I've been staying alive in this business for 20 years. I know things. Tony stared at Bumpy's extended hand. Everything he'd been taught told him to refuse. Loyalty to the family, honor among criminals, never switch sides. But everything Tony had just experienced told him that Bumpy Johnson was smarter, more prepared, and more dangerous than anyone in the Genovese family. What about Fat Tony? He'll want to know what happened. Fat Tony will be told that you succeeded, that Bumpy Johnson is dead, that you completed the contract and disappeared with your payment. By the time he figures out the truth, you'll be under my protection. And if I refuse your offer, then you walk away. Right now. Take your broken gun. Go back to Fat Tony. Tell him you missed 7 shots and see how long you stay alive. The Genovese family doesn't forgive failure, Tony. You know that. Tony thought about his options. Go back to a family that would probably kill him for failing, or join the man who had outsmarted every assassination attempt ever made against him. Tony reached out and shook Bumpy's hand. What do I do first? First, Bumpy said, you learn to shoot properly. The next 3 months were unlike anything Tony had ever experienced. Bumpy didn't just give him targets and weapons, he gave him an education. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Tony met with Bumpy at a private shooting range in Queens. But instead of just practicing marksmanship, Bumpy taught Tony strategy. Shooting isn't just about accuracy, Bumpy explained during their first lesson. It's about preparation, psychology, and adaptation. You missed 7 shots because you were overconfident. You trusted your weapon without understanding your enemy. Bumpy showed Tony how to properly inspect ammunition, how to test weapons under stress, how to recognize when equipment had been compromised. But more importantly, he taught Tony how to think like a target instead of just a shooter. Every man I've killed tried to approach the job like you did, Bumpy said. Find the target, aim, shoot. But they never asked themselves, what if the target knows I'm coming? What if the target has been preparing for this moment? What if the target is smarter than me? Tony's skills improved dramatically under Bumpy's guidance. Not just his shooting accuracy, which had always been excellent, but his tactical thinking, his patience, his ability to read situations and people. Within 3 months, Tony had become something he'd never been before, not just a killer but an artist. November 15th, 1963. Tony's first job for Bumpy Johnson. The target was Vincent the Weasel Torino, a Colombo family soldier who had been selling information to the FBI. Simple job, 1 shot, clean kill, no witnesses. But Tony approached this job differently than any he'd done for the Genovese family. Instead of just finding Vincent and shooting him, Tony spent 2 weeks studying Vincent's habits, his routes, his security, his psychology. He learned that Vincent was paranoid about being followed, changed his routine constantly, and always carried 2 guns. Tony didn't try to ambush Vincent on the street or in a restaurant. Instead, he waited for the one moment when Vincent's guard was down. Every Thursday morning, Vincent visited his mother's grave in Calvary Cemetery. He always went alone, always stayed for exactly 20 minutes, always stood in the same spot. Thursday, November 15th, 1963. 8:30 a.m. Vincent knelt at his mother's grave, placing flowers and saying prayers. Tony was positioned 200 yards away, hidden behind another headstone, with a clear shot. But instead of firing immediately, Tony waited. He watched Vincent's breathing, his posture, his movements. He calculated wind speed and direction. He prepared for every possible variable. 1 shot. Clean kill. Vincent never knew what hit him. When Tony reported back to Bumpy, Bumpy smiled. "Good work. But tell me what you learned." "I learned that patience is more important than accuracy, that understanding your target is more important than having a clear shot, and that preparation prevents failure." "Exactly. You're not just a shooter anymore, Tony. You're a professional." For the next 5 years, Tony Romano worked for Bumpy Johnson. He completed 17 contracts, never missed a target, never left evidence, never failed a job. But more importantly, he learned lessons about loyalty, respect, and honor that the Genovese family had never taught him. Tony never went back to the Genovese family. Fat Tony Salerno believed that Tony had successfully killed Bumpy Johnson and disappeared with the payment. It wasn't until 1968, when Bumpy died of natural causes, that the truth came out. August 3rd, 7 shots, 7 misses. A professional killer's worst nightmare became the best opportunity of his life. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to an enemy isn't to fight them. It's to show them what they could become if they chose to fight for the right side. Tony Romano learned something that night that changed his entire perspective. It's not about who you kill. It's about who you protect. And the best way to become a perfect killer isn't to practice on innocent people. It's to learn from someone who's been the target and survived. If this story of failure, redemption, and the power of proper training moved you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you understand that the best teachers are often the people you're trying to defeat. Share this with someone who knows that missing the target sometimes leads to hitting the jackpot. What would you have done in Tony's position? Let me know in the comments below.